Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you? All right, so I'm here today to talk to you about some interpersonal effectiveness skills that are a little beyond the scope of what DBT normally offers. All right, so I want to add some new stuff to your repertoire that'll enhance what you've already learned in interpersonal effectiveness, and I'll also show you how it relates to the DBT interpersonal effectiveness. Okay, so this stuff I'm going to call relationship masters and disasters. All right, it's kind of a catchy title. I hope you like it. But I actually didn't make it up myself. I wish I did, though. There's a guy named John Gottman who does a lot of research and therapy for couples. And he identified through his research some qualities of people that are really good at relationships and also qualities of people who are really bad at relationships. They're like qualities that are relationship killers. So to enhance our awareness of what we're bringing to the table, I'm going to go over these different qualities of the masters and the disasters, and I'm going to show you how DBT interpersonal effectiveness skills and beyond can help us be relationship masters, okay? And who doesn't need to get a little bit better at our interpersonal relationships, right? You could always stand to improve. So I hope this will be a good self-awareness kind of a talk today that'll help you in your relationships, all right? So because I like to end on a positive note, I'm going to flip it around and do the disasters first and end with the relationship masters and the skills, okay? So here we go. So first quality of a relationship disaster is someone who's very critical, all right? So you know the type of person I'm talking about, and you might even be that person sometimes, that the person is constantly pointing a finger, kind of like the people in the picture there. They're casting blame on the other person. They're nitpicking. They're finding every little fault and bringing it out. It's a lack of acceptance, right? So when we talk about radical acceptance of another person, we're accepting them as a whole person, somebody who's human, who has good points and negative points, just like we all do, right? But when we constantly harp on the negative, it could really kill the other person's spirit, especially if it's a parent and a kid, or even in a couple, or in a friendship, right? It's like, it really can bring you down when someone's constantly criticizing you. Or even like they said, they're demanding the other person change. Like, let's say I have an image of how I wish that person would be. And whenever the person deviates from my image of that, I start criticizing them because I want them to be how I want them to be. But guess what? People are going to be how they're going to be. We don't have control over that, right? So we can't always pick on every little thing. We have to let some stuff go. All right, so the criticism is a major quality of relationship disasters. So we need to check in with ourselves and say, are there times when I'm too critical? Or who am I most critical with? And sometimes it's the people we're closest to because the expectations are higher, right? So we really have to do the non-judgmental stuff that we talk about in mindfulness, like the house skill, non-judgmental, super important, right? It's kind of the opposite of criticism. All right, so let's go to the next one. All right, so the next one is defensiveness, right? So if you notice, when we talk about the disasters part, all the version of people being a disaster is having a hard time dealing with vulnerability. So when you feel like you're really vulnerable in a relationship to a point where you feel vulnerability is dangerous or scary or painful, then you're going to do what you need to do to defend yourself. So criticism is one version of defending yourself because you're focusing the negativity outward, right? Defensiveness in all its different forms is another version, so to speak, of protecting yourself from vulnerability. So when someone offers you feedback, it could be hard to take that in, right? Or if the person tries to give constructive criticism about something, it's a risk to take that on. So sometimes we protect ourselves by defending ourselves, instead of really listening. And we're kind of pushing people away and pushing their words and their thoughts away from us. But if we're chronically defensive, it also gets in the way of closeness because we need to have some vulnerability and some willingness to let people in order to be close and intimate with people. So the defensiveness pushes people away, and it makes it very hard for a relationship to succeed, okay? All right, so let's go on to the next one. So contempt. So I'm sure you've heard the term before, but I wanted to just define it. just to make sure we're really clear about what it means. Okay, so contempt is related to like, a negative, a hatred, a looking down upon somebody. So I looked it up and they said a feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving of scorn. Like this person's just a piece of crap. Like he's just like the crap under my shoe, right? I'm trying not to use foul language in case we have some young folks listening, but it's just like when you feel someone so small, like they're not even fully human to you. And when you look upon someone you're close to that way and talk to them that way, it's a terrible way to relate to somebody. I mean, how do you think the person feels? I'm sure you could think of a time when someone related to you with contempt. It feels terrible, right? You can't relate to someone as human to human if you're contemptuous toward the other person, all right? So that's why that's a relationship disaster, all right? Another thing is stonewalling. So if you look at the picture, those people are sitting on the same bench, but they're totally separate. They're looking in different directions away from each other. And there's almost like there's a wall between them. So another way we protect ourselves is to put a wall up. So when we feel overwhelmed by the other person, sometimes instead of engaging with them, we just try to block them out because we feel like our boundaries are too porous and they're just seeping into us. And it's overwhelming and it feels invasive. So sometimes the best we could think of doing is to just block them out, to tune them out, to not listen, to walk away from them in the middle of a sentence, and just to kind of like shut down in a way. But that also interferes with connectedness and intimacy. And sometimes the more you stonewall, the more the person chases you, the more they try to shake some sense into you and get a rise out of you. And then you feel more overwhelmed, and then you stonewall even more, right? So it becomes like a vicious, but that pattern of, chasing and stonewalling, it really could get out of hand and it could really kill a relationship. All right, so next, having a negative perspective, right? Sometimes because of patterns we've been in with a person, we're just assuming it's going to be bad. And we could feel too vulnerable giving the person a chance, or assuming that things could be neutral, or assuming that things might be different this time, because maybe we've been burned many times before. Maybe in the past we were optimistic and we were let down so many times that we protect ourselves defensively, right, by keeping a negative perspective. Like when you get really cynical about something and you're like, nah, it's probably not going to work anyway, right? Because it's too hard to deal with the disappointment sometimes. That's why we do that, all right? But when someone always relates to you thinking of the worst, sometimes it brings out the worst in the person, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if someone always assumed you're going to fail in school, you might have ended up just failing, because maybe you just lost faith in yourself because the other person didn't have faith in you, or you just assumed that you were their negative perspective because that's what they were reflecting back to you. So think of how much that could kill someone's spirit, and that's why it's a relationship disaster. Okay, so let's go positive now, okay? So let's flip it around, because I like to end on a positive note, like I said. So unlike relationship disasters that are very negative, relationship masters try to keep things positive, right? Look how happy that family looks. Maybe they were on a hike and they finally got to the end and got to sit down on a log, right? I've been in that place, and it's a great moment, right? But that's how we have to be with people. We have to have positive interactions, have set up positive activities together, have a sense of humor, be kind to each other, if someone does something nice, to recognize it, show appreciation for each other, and not just assume like, well, that's just what he's supposed to do, right? Recognize it, say something, say thank you, and don't just like take someone for granted, give freely of yourself to the person, be generous. All these things kind of fuel the relationship and just it makes it easier to feel close to somebody when they're positive with you, when they can look at you and look behind that fuzzy TV screen and see the good picture behind it, right? See the best in you. That's like something that's really valuable. Those are the kind of people you want in your life. All right, so next, how does this relate in DBT? Well, The give skill. Okay, so give is about keeping good relationships. So when you're gentle, interested, validating, and using an easy manner, all those things about keeping it positive, right? When you're kind to people, you're interested in what they're saying, you're trying to show that you understand their point of view with validation, and you're kind of easy manner, which is having fun and using a sense of humor, all that stuff is very related to what we just talked about. And also in the emotion regulation module, the A for ABC, please, reducing vulnerability to negative emotions, is about accumulating positive emotions. And one way to do that is to create positive experiences in your interpersonal relationships. And that helps keep it positive, right? All right, so next, relationship masters assertively express their needs, right? So they don't assume people could read their mind. They don't demand in a nasty, hostile way, right? Or expect unreasonable things. They assertively express what their needs are, using language that the other person can hear in a way that's respectful and makes the person want to listen to you. All right, so sentences they might use are I feel statements, you know, or letting them know this is what I need, or asking with politeness, even though maybe you live together and you forget about politeness. Would you please da da da, instead of, now come on, you better, right? And to keep the conversation going, there's an ongoing open dialogue, right? Where you're willing to listen to each other and make compromises over issues, you know, not just being too set on your way, being flexible about it, right? So each person could feel like their needs have room in that relationship. All right, so in DBT, dear man, of course, right? So the perfect way to express your needs, especially if it's a little more complex. You describe, you know, what's going on, you express your feelings about it, you assert by asking for that thing that you feel like you need, and then you reward the other person for trying to help you out, for listening, for maybe doing you a favor. And then the next part is all about the after you get the answer. So staying mindful, staying focused on what you're asking for, being confident, and negotiating with the person, right? That's that part we just talked about with the continuing to dialogue and compromise, right? So very similar. Compromise and negotiation are very similar. All right, so practice your dear man. Okay, so next, relationship masters listen to each other, right? Instead of just being focused on expressing yourself and what you want to say, there's receptiveness to hearing the other person, right? That they have room in your heart and in your mind in that relationship, right? So you have to show that you're listening. Don't just be looking down on your phone or walking around the house or preoccupied with something else. Like, give them your attention, one, mindfully, right? Use validation to try to understand their point of view, because obviously a lot of times we have different points of view. And the next one, accept influence from the other person. So what does that mean? If they're telling you something that's different from what you think, that you're considering it. Maybe you're taking in their feedback. Maybe if they said, you know, it would really help me out if you A, B, and C, you try the A, B, and C, right? You don't just block them out. You allow them to influence you and what you do with them. When they have a good point, acknowledge it. You know, that's another way of letting them in. You know, okay, it wasn't just what I thought. I see you have a good point too. And, you know, when they tell you something, you know, about yourself, maybe like, you know what, you're getting a little critical. Acknowledge it, own up. You know what, maybe you're right. I'll try not to be so critical. Accepting influence. Okay, so all that is super important, because if you don't listen, guess what? The arguments are going to start. They're going to get louder and louder and louder until you listen. So you gotta make sure your ears are open, your heart is open. Okay, so DBT for listening, obviously give would probably factor in, but validation. So validation shows you're listening. It's actually the first level of validation, and it shows understanding, right? And it shows some receptivity to that other person. All right, for more on validation, watch my video. Okay, relation masters handle conflict well. Okay, so instead of getting nasty, instead of just pushing your point and not listening, instead of escalating it, you know, you're trying to stay calm during the conflict, right? So this requires some emotional regulation. You're going to own up to your side of things, right? One of the best things you could do besides validation during a conflict, and so validation is like showing the other person you understand their point of view, is to own up to what your side was, right? So if part of it was my fault and the other person let me know that, I got to apologize for my part. You know, it's up to me. It's not always the other person's fault, right? And if I own up to my part, they might calm down because I showed that I heard them. And sometimes they say that people who are good at relationships know how to co-regulate, right? So we talk about self-regulation, which is what I can do to calm myself down. But if I'm close with a person, sometimes we know how to regulate each other. Like I know what to say to calm somebody down. Or, maybe sometimes I know when they're receptive to a little humor or lightheartedness or distraction. And, I know how to manipulate the situation, not in a negative way, but in a positive way to help that person feel a little bit better, right? So we're on each other's side. We're not just at each other, right? That I remember that the person I'm arguing with is also maybe the same person I'm really good friends with or that I love, right? So I always have that in my mind as a mindfulness during conflict. Okay, so of course, give, really important in that during a conflict too. So it seems like, give is something you would do when things are going really well, but it's actually also something you can do when things are getting heated, right? And that could help tone down the conflict. I put mindfulness in there because you need to be mindful of yourself as well as the other person during a conflict. Like I have to be aware of how I'm reacting and then maybe use a little urge surfing so I don't have to blurt out certain things that I shouldn't, right? Or be mindful of how the other person is reacting so I know how to co-regulate with that person, all right? And of course, validation, letting them know that I understand where they're at. Okay, so that's that. All right, so relationship disasters don't have to be your future. You could become a relationship master and use your DBT to help with that. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you guys. I hope that was helpful. And I'll see you again soon. All right, take care now.